Well, good morning, Celebration Church. I'm so glad that you're here. My name's Brian, one of the pastors. Man, was that not just beautiful and amazing and awesome? Do you know the only reason that we don't experience that every time is because we don't anticipate experiencing that every time? Now, at Celebration Church, we don't chase experiences, by the way. We chase Jesus. We want to encounter Him. We want Him to change us. We want Him to be not part of our lives, but our very lives. He's why we're here. So, in the room, still on sabbatical, but here today to be with his family and her family, Dennis and Joanna Chapman. And the Garretts, they're in before they go and do whatever Jesus tells them to do in whatever part of the world, right? And we're sending them. I hope it sounds like that too. Just sound effects are better. We're sending you. From here on out, if you send anybody, just everybody work on that. Everybody go. All right. You can also use that if you have a little boy. That's a laser gun. That's multiple things. Very interchangeable. So we're in week 20 in our Acts series. We're in the sending part of the series where we've talked about how the church mobilizes and goes out and penetrates culture, changes culture, interrupts culture, shakes culture up, completely blows culture up, figuratively speaking and spiritually speaking. Let me just throw that out there. And changes the face of the planet. I was thinking about where the Garretts are going. I was thinking about just the influence that they have and the space that they have. It's very similar to the size in Acts. We've got a celebrator who lives in Kauai who just recently went over there and they're on mission reaching people for Christ. And I'm like, that's about the same area that they lived in the book of Acts. And then I think about Wilkes County. And it's like 7 Jerusalems. And it's just like it's a big county. And it's a huge area. And I tell you what, God, His movement and His moving is not restricted by geography. When I came to Wilkes County like 12 years ago, I found out that Wilkes County was full of 300 churches, and that's been mind-boggling to me since. About 69,000 people, about 230 people per church, and we've reached our entire county. Not a lofty goal. And I found out that the churches had hit like 700, 800, maybe once or twice churches hit 900 people in attendance, in regular attendance, and then it seemed like that those churches that hit that ceiling would often just almost crumble. And then I found out a lot about the history and the spiritual history of Wilkes County, of John Wilkes, the guy. He was friends with apparently people who were in the Satanic Church. Now, I've just read this, but also you got the Moravian Falls, which is a plant from the Moravians, which, if you know anything about the Moravian movement, 100 years of ceaseless prayer. And you see a battle of light and dark here. Like, I'm just one county south of here. And the gospel just seemed to spread so much easier. And then the work here is so much harder, but so much greater. Seems like everybody's eggs are in the basket of Wilkes County staples, Lowe's, and NASCAR, and things like that. Wilkes County is known for some pretty global things. I want Wilkes County to not be known for anything except for the spread of the gospel. And that's not going to happen until we believe that the same God who launched the church here in Acts, regardless of hiccups, regardless of roadblocks, regardless of whatever, we penetrate and we blow through every roadblock, everything that Satan puts in our way. We fight. And it takes us becoming more strong as a church locally right here, this fellowship called Celebration. And we strengthen the other churches around us. We are in no competition with any other church ever. We're not here to sheep steal or sheep give away. If you came from another church and Celebration is now your home, we're going to handle this here in a minute. I hope you handled your business at your last church and came here being sent and in good fellowship. If not, you're welcome here. You just need to go clean that up in the name of Jesus. He'll clean it up. Because what's happened is that because there are 300 churches, you really don't have to commit to anywhere. If the preacher preaches too hard, or if you're confronted about something, you don't need, from here to the hospital, there's 11 churches. Pick one. I mean, the second we sort of feel like momentum is going, we hear, hey, they're leaving, and then we see somebody coming. The church no longer, in the Bible Belt, no longer submits to spiritual authority. They no longer really get committed unless there's a bunch of hype around the church. There's always the church in the county that's doing something great. You should be speaking for the church and in favor of her all the time, regardless of where you attend and regardless of what you feel about her, because you are her. And when we down the church and when we talk and we break up the church, you're talking about Jesus' bride. And I'm a pastor. You talk about my bride, it's probably going to be near me starting a prison ministry. Some of you are like, what does that mean? Just ask somebody later. I love the church. I love this church so much. My life has been invested here for 12 years. And I mean invested. Like if I left here, I literally would have to start everything over because it's all in. Some of us sitting in the seats, and it's not about being a pastor and the people. By the way, there is no pastor and people. We're all the church. You do your job, I'll do mine. And you got a job given to you by God. And it's a good job. It's a kingdom-focused job. It's an eternally changing job. But see, we got to do it. We got to submit to God. Turn to Acts chapter 15. I'm fired up. Y'all got me so fired up during worship because it was crazy in here. We're going to answer a question today. How do I grow and strengthen the church? And I want you to think about that question being to you, for you, and about you. How do I grow and strengthen the church? As we look at this and as we preach this text out, I'm going to be thinking about that too for myself. Because I'm not responsible for being complete yet. I'm responsible to continue to grow just like you, side by side, hand in hand with you. Maybe not hand in hand, but unless you're my wife, we can hold hands. But in Acts 15, we're going to go to the end of the chapter and finish that up. And this is a lot of churches don't like to preach this out because we're getting ready to handle something that's pretty awkward. This is why I believe the Bible is true. Because if you read the Bible, just look at Noah, how awesome that was until you see some huge, I'm talking dequalification things. Moses. Look at all these great leaders that as a pastor of here, if I did a couple of those things that they did, I would be asked to resign immediately. And I should resign immediately. But the Bible leaves all of that in there. If it wasn't true, how would you write it? I wouldn't put any of that. I mean, Noah right after the flood, you should go read what happened right after. You go, are you kidding me? That is crazy. Moses killed a man and went off and ran and then encountered God. I mean, Peter standing right beside Jesus, the Prince of Peace, cut a man's ear off. Jesus, I can imagine Jesus looking at Peter and be like, ear back on. What are you doing? What are you doing, Peter? I mean, the Bible is full of all the mistakes and all the glories of God. And people say, well, the Bible is full of those things. And, I thought they were is supposed to be about being godly. Well, guess what? The people of God are people. And it comes with all your mess. I love getting close to church people, and often people avoid us as pastors of really getting close because you got messy lives, but guess what? We have them too. And I love to see some of your messes, and I'm like, yes, I can share mine now. Hey, look at my mess. But sometimes we put on such a face when we come in here. In fact, if somebody walked in, if you're a guest with us, guess what? All these people look amazing. No messes. Don't let them lie to you. They are jacked up. See, you and I are the church, and we are responsible for the growth of the church and the strength of the church or the lack thereof. If you're not growing and you're not being strengthened, guess what? Neither is the church. So if you're sitting there stuck, guess what? We're stuck. If you're stuck spiritually and you have arrived, men are really susceptible to this. In our teenage years, and then of course it's going to be older than what's in my head, but after our teenage years, there's a little window in our 20s where guys seem to really grow. But then they hit this roadblock again and they decide this is who I am. Try to tell a teenage boy he needs to change something. And I love teenagers. It's the majority of my ministry, 19 years in student ministry. But to get them to think, hey, I should put all in with Jesus and do something great with my life. Talk to a 45-year-old man. Talk to him about how we talked a little bit about this last week. Talk to him a little bit how he worships. Why do you stand there and you don't sing when your hands are in your pocket? Well, I just don't sing. Then stick him in a football game with his team. That man will lose his mind. Put him in church. Satan's whispered to him that he doesn't do that. He's believed a lie. He's decided in his flesh that's who he is. So this isn't an us and them mentality. This is us together. So let's look, because we're going to get right into some controversy, as they may say in some countries, some controversy. Verse 36, if you're there, say I am. Sometime later, Paul said to Barnabas, let's go back and visit the brothers in all the towns where we preach the word of the Lord and see how they are doing. This is like a 1,000-mile journey. Barnabas wanted to take John, also called Mark, who wrote the book of Mark, by the way. He wanted to take him with him. Verse 37. Barnabas wanted to take John, verse 38. But Paul did not think it wise to take him because he had deserted them in Pamphylia and had not continued with them in the work. Verse 39. Why did they leave this in the Bible? Because it's real. Christians, they had such a sharp disagreement that they parted company. Barnabas took Mark and sailed for Cyprus, but Paul chose Silas and left. If you got a Bible, underline this. Commended by the brothers to the grace of the Lord. He went through Syria and Cilicia, strengthening the churches. So we looked at this passage. The first thing I want to break out, we're going to get in chapter 16 too. First thing I want to just break down is just the idea that they went back and checked on their work. How many of us have ever done that? First of all, do you have a work in the Lord? If not, today is the day you start your job. You're hired. You didn't even have to interview for the job. But you have a work in the Lord. How often do you check on it? And what extent will you go to check on it? I mean, they were committing to walking 1,000 miles again or more to go check on work they already did. Some of us talked to our neighbor a year ago, hadn't talked to him since. Check on the work. Go back and check on that. See, because the miles Paul walked just to check on the work he had already did surpasses most things that we do in a year. Now, I want you to see something that ended up happening here. If you look in verse 40, it says, and we'll handle the issue, the big elephant in the room. It says, but Paul chose Silas and left, commended by the brothers. Now, if you see verse 40, you see there's that's not the beginning of a sentence. It's in the middle. In the original, in the Greek, in verse 39, they had such a sharp disagreement that they parted company. Barnabas took Mark and sailed for Cyprus, comma, but Paul chose Silas and left, comma, commended by the brothers. It got to the point that this disagreement, they got to a place where they knew that they could actually maximize something for the kingdom. And it says that the church there, the brothers, the people in leadership, actually gave their consent on Paul and Barnabas going different directions. We'll talk about why that is here in just a second. But the first thing that ended up happening is somehow, write this down, is I need to find agreement in disagreement. Now, first of all, let me say this. If you have somebody in your life that you've never disagreed with, let me tell you this, you're both wrong. We never have a disagreement. Well, somebody's not being real, because there's no way that you can agree on everything. Some of us are afraid of disagreements because we think that they're going to ruin everything. And some of us love to disagree with everything. So you are closer to one end or the other. You avoid disagreements and think they're the end of everything, or you look to find a disagreement. You love meetings. In fact, you love idea meetings, because there's nothing greater than a high-flying idea to get shot down. You're like, yeah. And you can argue and you can articulate faster than most people can come up with an idea. See, Paul chose Silas, Barnabas chose Mark. Now let's talk about this for just a second. Why was Paul against Mark going with him? Well, if you look back in Acts, a few chapters, Mark was with Paul and Barnabas in Pamphylia. And something abruptly, for some reason, Mark just left. He had deserted them and left and went back. Well, there's speculation. Everybody say, we don't know. We don't know. Because here's what ends up happening. I'm not going to do an error here in eisegesis, read into the text. I want to exegesis. What we know about this disagreement is exactly what we read. Paul did not want Mark to go because he left him and Barnabas in Pamphylia. He was on a journey with him. But let's talk a little bit about Mark. Mark was a Jewish man. He was supposedly one of the younger disciples. And he was apparently growing in maturity quite a bit. Where Paul was getting ready to go back to was a heavily Gentile dominated areas. Now, if we look at the beginning of what we handled last week, we saw that a big disagreement, an argument rose up over circumcision. Again, ask your dad, okay? Now, and the Jews were wanting the Gentiles, the non-Jewish people, to be circumcised as adults, as young boys, and they wanted it to happen to show, to prove, as a contingency for their salvation. An argument broke out about that, and they said, absolutely not. You're saved by grace through faith alone. That's it. Jesus saves you. Despite your religion, despite your race, despite your people group or your demographic, Jesus saves you. You don't have to do a thing. He did it all on the cross. Now that's hard, because there's some people in this world that you say, wow, they're going to have to really clean up their life before they can even see Jesus. Well, guess what? It doesn't matter if they're squeaky clean. They still can't see through a black window. Jesus has to take that off and open their eyes. So Mark, getting back into this Gentile-dominated regions, he might have struggled greatly to think, and they just cleaned up this mess and this people trying to impose legalism in the church. So that's a speculation, but it's only a speculation. Now, why did Barnabas choose Mark? Well, this is real easy. It was his cousin. I mean, Barnabas can't look at, sorry, Mark, bro, you on your own. His mama would have been mad at him. You left your cousin all alone. That's what it would have sounded like in the South. What's up, cuz? See, disagreements can be dangerous, and they can lead to division. But that's what makes them dangerous, when they lead to division. That's not what happened here. And I've heard people talk about this text, and they go, wow, this divided the church. No, it didn't. It multiplied the church. Barnabas, Paul, Silas, and Mark were going to go this one direction. They had a disagreement, and God in His sovereignty said, watch this. And they went in two directions. Now, should they have had such a sharp disagreement that they couldn't get along? No, that was sin. And you say, well, what ended up happening to it? This is the last time we hear about Barnabas in the book of Acts. But if we look into the future just a little bit and see what ended up happening, we can see that we need to write this down: reconcile all disagreements. See, sometimes in a moment you cannot fix a disagreement, so you need to step away. If you don't agree with leadership in the church, guess what? That's okay. We're big boys and girls. But when you use that disagreement to start dividing the church, you're actually doing what Satan wants. He loves the church divided against itself. He loves it. He exploits it all the time. Do you know it's happening in this room right now? I don't know who you are, so I can't call you out. But there's something in our heart that could potentially divide our church. It could be brewing in your heart right now, and you need to be aware of it. And it can start by a disagreement. Disagreements are okay. We say things, but some of us we disagree so much, we use statements like, well, I'm not a yes man. Well, we don't want yes men and women in Celebration Church. We want yes Lord men and women in this church. So I am a yes man to the Lord. And whatever He says, I hope I'm walking with Him, and I say, yes, Lord, and it should lead us to some type of kingdom-changing agreement. But we got to reconcile all agreements. Proverbs 17:14 says this: starting a quarrel is like breaching a dam, so drop the matter before the dispute breaks out. You don't have to err every time you disagree with something. Some of you want to elbow your spouse right now, don't you? Don't do it. Or you want to flick an ear of your child. Yeah. If you don't agree, you don't have to air it. Guess what? There's somebody more important than you that actually controls the universe, and His name is God. Jesus Christ owns it all, and He knows it all, and He's sovereign over it all. So just because you have a differing opinion, you don't have to disagree. Now, that's where you have to pray and ask the Lord. Because some people, they don't realize it, but they're often looking for a disagreement. So we'll go back to the meeting. Do you walk into a meeting, and you know it's a think tank meeting, or it's a meeting where you spend all night before getting ready to bring up all the issues that you think needs to change in your organization or church? Or did you get on your face and say, God, how can I contribute to making what I have, that what you've called me to do, better and more kingdom impacting? Sometimes we just need to drop the matter. Romans 12:18 says this: if it is possible. Now, I'm going to pause right there and ask the church this: how many things are possible? Where did you get that from? That sounds outlandish. All things, finish it. All things are possible with God. So, we read the Bible in its full context. And it says, if it is possible, so therefore it is. As far as it depends on you, there's the contingency. Live at peace with, I want you to, right now, on your paper or in your Bible, put down the name. Write the names, first names or initials, of the people right now that you're out of relationship with. I don't care if he's watching right now. My father doesn't talk to his children. First time in my life, I'm in ministry because of my father. And right now, we're not in great relationship. We try to pursue them, but nothing comes about it. And it breaks my heart. But guess what? I'm not going to give up. Because my father also taught me not to give up. So I'm going to use what he taught me as a child, not to give up. And I'm going to hound him to death in prayer. Do you know I'm in ministry because my father fell madly in love with Jesus, got on his face and prayed, and God made me so miserable in my partying and sin that I gave it up and saw how good Jesus was. So he's on my list. If I'm on your list, you better come see me right after this. We should biblically be willing and active and reconcile constant every relationship around us, lost or saved. I have a relationship with this guy and been talking to him for a while, and he found out I was a pastor, and he says, some of the things that I say and I do, he says, have you been a pastor this whole time? I said, yep, the whole time. He said, well, why don't you say something? I said, because I know you've expressed that you're not a follower of Jesus. You're not really an atheist. You're more agnostic. And I said, I don't expect you to act like a Christian. I said, but when you meet Jesus, I would ask you to quit talking like that. Because that's not representative of your Father. And that you're taking his name in vain. By the way, that's probably more of the way you take the Lord's name in vain. Is you represent him and you don't live out what it looks like. You carry his name. Paul wrote that in Romans 12:18, but he also wrote this in Colossians. Because you think, what happened to the relationship? Well, listen to this. My fellow prisoner Aristarchus sends you his greetings. Also does what? Mark. Everybody say Mark. Why would he write Mark down if the relationship wasn't good? He didn't. Apparently, Mark matured. Apparently, Mark, do you know, he actually brought letters and spent time ministering to Paul in prison. And I'm sure he was standing there when him and Paul and Barnabas had this disagreement about Mark. And they didn't have a radio to turn up when they went on their journey, so I'm sure Barnabas and Mark talked about Paul. And hey, Barnabas, what's up with Paul? Like, why couldn't we go with him? Because you left in Pamphylia and Paul don't want you around. What? Now, if you knew somebody didn't want you around, would you go minister to them in prison? No, they're going to be very low on your list unless you understand the bigger kingdom picture. As does Mark, the cousin of Barnabas. That's how we know he's his cousin. You have received instructions about him. So now Paul is giving instructions about Mark, whom he did not want to go on this second missionary journey with. So guess what ended up happening? They had to have reconciled over whatever the dispute was. If he comes to you, welcome him. Now, Paul's not going to ask them to do something that he will not. Well, look at Philemon. He wrote another letter, and it says, Epaphras, your son's next name, right? Or your next son's name. Your son's next name, anyways. My fellow prisoner in Christ Jesus sends you greetings. Also, and so does Mark, Aristarchus, Demas, Luke, my fellow workers. So now Mark is a fellow worker coming out of Paul's mouth. That's the way he describes. And then when he writes a second letter to a young pastor named Timothy, he says this, only Luke is with me. Get Mark and bring him with you because he is helpful to me in my ministry. Paul was called to the Gentiles. He was going in a Gentile area for some reason because of the thing that happened in Pamphylia. He says, I don't want Mark to go with us on this trip, Barnabas, to walk 1,000 miles or more. And now he says, hey, I want my boy Mark. So you should do whatever it takes. We should do whatever it takes to reconcile all relationships. So write this down. We should look for a way to multiply ministry and not divide. Look, if you've been doing a ministry for a while and right now somebody you can't seem to get along with them, don't leave ministry, go do something else until you can figure out how to reconcile that relationship. But just because you go somewhere else doesn't mean you leave that alone, because that makes the church sick. If you have a relationship that's sick, guess what? We're sick. We are sick. We're one body. And I don't want Celebration Church to get the rest of the church sick. So therefore, we got to handle our business. We got to clean up our house. We've got to do what we've got to do to handle that. Well, they looked for a way. So what God did in His sovereignty, Paul and Barnabas went to Cyprus, and Paul went to Syria and Cilicia. And now 2 missionary journeys came out of one. It's a beautiful thing. And now the gospel is spread across the world because of this moment. But see, the disciples didn't just have a moment of potential sin. We don't know how nasty it got or even if sin, but the disagreement was sharp. That's all we know. That's it. But it allowed the gospel to spread across the world. And if that wouldn't have happened in that moment in God's sovereignty, then the Asia Minor, Europe, those places wouldn't have been covered. Now, some of you are going, why do I need to know all this? Because guess what? We're still the same church, and we should be on the same type of urgent missions. You. Everybody say me. Sometimes I wonder, because I sit out there and I love sitting under preaching. I always try to make sure that I'm not listening for somebody else. Because Satan would love that. Oh, you're bored right now. Who cares about what happened 2,000 years ago? Oh my goodness, are you serious? You're going to listen to that? You wouldn't be here if it wasn't for 2,000 years ago. There would be no United States of America in which you enjoy your freedom to be agnostic or apathetic, because there wouldn't have been men and women of God who laid down their lives, so therefore you could deny God or live an apathetic life, claiming to be a believer in Jesus, but then having no fruit. Men and women like this, who had sharp disagreements, disputes, still walked in obedience. Now we're going to hop into 16. Let's see what ended up happening to Paul. He came to Derbe and then to Lystra, where a disciple named Timothy lived. Oh, you were wondering how the relationship got started, because he wrote 2 letters to him and talks about this kid all the time, whose mother was a Jewish and a believer, but whose father was a Greek. The brothers at Lystra and Iconium spoke well of him. All right, it's going to get weird. You ready? Paul wanted to take him along on the journey, so he had him circumcised. So he circumcised him because of the Jews who lived in that area, for they knew that his father was a Greek. As they traveled from town to town, they delivered decisions reached by the apostles and the elders in Jerusalem for the people to obey. Go back 1 chapter at the beginning of 16. You can see what Paul was teaching them as far as what happens after you believe. So the churches were strengthened in faith and grew daily in what? Numbers. They were strengthened in faith and grew daily in numbers. Now, this might be, somebody says, well, this is a contradiction in the Bible. Did they not just handle this circumcision thing? Paul was the forefront of that to say, no, that's legalism. And now he just circumcised a full-grown man, a young man. Why? Well, again, it doesn't say. But we do understand Jewish culture. And Jewish culture would be this. Timothy's mom was a Jew, and on the 8th day of Timothy's birth, he should have been circumcised. And whether it be a Jew or a Gentile situation, culturally, this would have been very odd, and people would have rejected Timothy. Because Paul said later, he said, I become all things to all people so that some might be saved. So Paul is saying, I'm not going to stand here and tell you all that you have to go through these legalistic rituals, but guess what? There's some things I'm going to do that are going to be tough in my life, and I'm just going to do them because this culture will receive that. And it might be hard. But it'll never be sin. So some of you are like, yeah, that's why I had the pastor of my last church, the church I grew up in, who mentored me, and his name is Jack Carver. He said when he was in seminary, they would go out and hand out tracts and stuff like that. There was one guy that he would go to the strip joint and witness to the people in the strip joint. The strip joint, appropriate to say from the pulpit. And he said, he asked me to go one time. We pulled up and he said, I can't go in there. He said, why not? They need to hear the gospel. He says, I can't be in that situation. I can't not unsee what I see in there. I'm not going in. That is sin for me. And I still to this day think about that scenario. I go, there is no way I could feel that would be a legitimate place for anyone in the body of Christ to be. Now, outside, witnessing to them in a different context, I think that's where we should be. Because some of us, we justify walking into sin and engaging in potential sinful things to reach the gospel. Some of us, we get married that way. We marry a non-believer in hopes to lead them to Jesus. That is sin. You don't missionary date and you don't missionary marry. But if you are married to a non-believer, guess what? You're married to them and the Bible gives you clear direction. Continue to worship Jesus and pray for them. And they will see your love for Jesus, and that will impact them so greatly that maybe they'll come to faith. See, you got to use this. So they went there, and he told Timothy, hey, we got to take care of this if we're going to go on mission. Because you're a Jew. Why didn't this happen? Well, he had a father who was a Greek, and probably at day 8, they might have had a big adult conversation, as married people do. So I got to look, write this down. I need to be like Paul, looking for opportunities to disciple someone. This should be constant in your mind, especially if you want to be a Bible-believing Jesus follower. You cannot say you are a follower of Jesus and not have this etched into your heart to look for someone to disciple. There's a pattern that's in the Bible. It's not a command, but write these 3 things down. The first is submit to a Paul. Second is come alongside of Barnabas. And third is mentor Timothy. We're going to break those down. The first one is submit to a Paul. Write down Hebrews 13:17. See, Paul was someone, when he walked in the room, even if he was co-laborers with the other disciples, for some reason, when Paul walked in the room, who do you think was in charge? Paul. We see that. We see that almost everyone submitted to Paul's spiritual authority. Now, we in the U.S. often submit to titles more than we do spiritual authority. And titles are often given to people who God hasn't been given, has not given them spiritual authority. But guess what? If they have the title, we're trusting that and we submit to that. We're not going to sit there and pick and choose. If somebody is a life group leader, we've chosen them. You should submit to their spiritual authority. If there's a pastor or a mentor or someone discipling you, you should trust that. Why? Because it's actually a good dose of humility for us. You should be able to write down, if I say, write down the person you're submitting to besides your spouse. And by the way, wives, submit to your husbands, but you know what the Bible also says? It says submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. So there's a mutual submission. Why? Because ultimately you're in submission under to God, and if you're truly submitting to God, everything else falls in place. Now, this isn't about dictatorship, it's about responsibility. God's given spiritual care and responsibility to some of us. And to you. So you submit to a Paul. Obey your leaders and submit to their authority. They keep watch over you as men who must give an account. Obey them so that their work will be a what? Joy. Now, Timothy was asked to be circumcised. I promise you, I'm going to step out on a limb here. I don't think a pastor or a leader at this church is going to ever ask you to do that. Just going to throw that out there. But I will promise you this, we'll ask you to do something hard. We'll say, hey, there's a week coming up, or there's a semester of a life group where we want you to give sacrificially. You know, some people will actually take off work during Love Week so they can serve. And I think about in comparison just the sacrifice and things that are there that we need to do. It says, obey them so that their work will be a joy, not a burden, for that would be of no advantage to you. We should be strengthening the pastors of not only this church, but the churches around. Some of you know my testimony, but one of the first things when I surrendered to ministry is I said, I will never be a pastor. And I'm going to be an evangelist. Somebody said, why? I said, well, evangelist gets to come in and preach and sort of awaken the church and maybe say some tough things and then leave, and then the pastor gets to handle it. I said, I've watched pastors in the church I grew up get devoured over and over, and my personality won't handle that. I'll fight you. No, I'm kidding. But I saw so many people in the church because the church gets divided and becomes the pastor and the people. I said, I won't be a pastor because, man, I don't want people attacking me or attacking my family. Then God said, you ain't got to worry about them. I'm your God. You're a pastor. Okay, all right. I'll be a pastor. And I love people. And that's probably why I get sort of nervous about getting attacked, is because I love people so much that that's one of my struggles. I have to make sure the approval of people isn't over the approval of God. And I struggle with that sometimes. If I know somebody doesn't like me, I'm like, oh my goodness, I got to fix it right now. I don't know if you feel that sometimes. I don't like people not to like me. But I have lots to not like. So do you. Submit to Paul, then come alongside of Barnabas. You know, it's no advantage, by the way, it's no advantage to you if the pastors are wore out and beat down. Of any church. You see a pastor, love on them, tell them you're praying for them. I don't care if you go to their church. If you see a pastor and you know them, the majority of them you can pick out in a restaurant, can't you? Just walk up to them and say, well, can I get your name? And I want to pray for you this week. And just minister to them. All right, come alongside of Barnabas. Ecclesiastes 4, 9, and 10. If you don't have any friends in this room or friends at Celebration Church, I mean deep friends, you're in a very vulnerable place. Why? 2 are better than 1 because they have a good return for their work. We have no loners here. If you're a loner and you like to work alone, that's okay, but we want you to work alone with somebody. If one falls down, his friend can help him up. But pity the man, pity the fool who falls and has no one to help him up. Now watch this. I want you to be honest, and you're going to be shocked at this. Raise your hand if you have been in a crowded room and felt alone. Raise your hand. I think that's something to address. How does Satan do that? He tells you you're unworthy, you don't really have friends, you did it again, I can't believe you. You should just not go to church. These people don't like you. Or look at those people, they're stuck up. Look at that. You know what they were doing yesterday. And he isolates you, he removes you. But pity the man who falls and has no one to help him up. Be in community, be in a life group, do those things. So we submit to a Paul, we come alongside of Barnabas, and third, we mentor a Timothy. This is the number one neglected thing in the church. And if there's things that sort of, as a pastor, make me a little bit sick, is when churches say, hey, we're really focusing on discipleship. And I say, well, how many people are you reaching? Well, we're not really. We're just trying to go deeper. You can't do that. If you're growing closer to Jesus and growing deeper, your hunger and your broken heart for the community is going to be even greater. You won't be able to stand your disobedience. You'll be the most, and that's why churches are full of miserable people. Because they're trying to grow deeper, but they're actually growing more bitter. You cannot be a disciple without making disciples. You cannot. So if you're sitting in this room and you're not mentoring a Timothy, you cannot continue to grow in your faith. Why? Because it's in the Bible. Go therefore and make what? Converts. No, it doesn't say that. Make good church members. Make good U.S. citizens. No, it says make disciples. Well, what is a disciple? It's a follower of Jesus. So as you're following Jesus, you're bringing somebody who's following Jesus, and they're bringing somebody who's following Jesus. I don't care how old you are or ill-equipped. We've been doing life-on-life discipleship for about 9-10 months now, and there's people who I did not ever think are sitting down with somebody and leading them through Christian foundational principles. And it is amazing to see the work that they're doing. So this, I want to show you something pretty cool. You cannot see the names on here, but this is right now in the past 9-10 months what has happened with Life on Life discipleship. Every one of those little green things and red things are people. And this a little tier that's growing. It's our Life on Life tree. And I wish it was as big as that wall. Because I know that this looks like a lot, but there's a whole lot more people sitting in seats right now. You say, Brian, I'm really busy. I don't have time. Oh, well, hold on. I'm not saying you got to have to do Life on Life, but who are you discipling? Because you have time for that. How do you know I have time to do that? Because God made you. And He wrote in your story, go and make disciples. And God would never command something He will not empower you to do. Well, what does that mean, Brian? That means God made time for you. Something's got to go, or you're going to have to suck it up and do more. You're going to ask God to give you a fresh wind, a fresh fire, a fresh wave in your spirit. And you're going to have to get up off the couch. I know you work 60 hours, but you get one life. And there's 69,000 people in this county, and the church will not be healthy until you handle those relationships that are broken and you start discipling people, because disciples make disciples. Paul wrote to Timothy. I mean, would you be rough and give clear direction to somebody that you just had circumcised? I mean, I'd be like, anything you want, man. I'm so sorry. You want a car? I'm sorry I asked you to do that. I know it happened to me when I was 8, but I don't remember. On the 8th day. It says, "In these things you have heard from me, and say, in the presence of many witnesses, entrusted to reliable men who will also be qualified to teach others." So Paul looked at Timothy and said, young man, I want you to find men and women in the church that are hungry to teach men and women. Find the hungry people and feed them. Because hunger always spreads. Like I said, just watch. Watch the wave in Wilkes County. The church that, oh, those churches, they're doing crazy things. No, everybody from the other churches went over there. We don't want to reach church people, by the way. How many of you watch this? Grew up in church? Raise your hand. All right. Celebration Church is not your focus. Well, you're not our focus. But we're glad you're here because you are the focus of who we want to reach. You as a church person should know we should reach lost people. And we should be willing to do whatever it takes to reach the Gentile. That's not sin. Anything. We should be willing to go to the 1040 window with our little children in a hostile environment and say, yes, Lord. Because we got mentored and we got under somebody's passion and fire for God, and we said, I want that too. Because we had a Paul, and Paul said, go. And we had a Barnabas say, I'll go with you. And we had a Timothy to say, come on. And the world has changed. If every one of us discipled a person who discipled a person in our generation, the world would be reached. The world. 7.6 billion people. So what you going to do, Celebration? What we going to do? Grow this tree to reach the ends of the earth. Figure that out. There's a few ways to be discipled here. Some few intentional ways. One is we've got premarital counseling. You can talk to Pastor Dennis, Pastor Chris, or myself. You should do premarital before you get married. Right, married people? Yeah. You're going to regret it if you don't. We'll tell you all the problems you're going to have, and then you'll have to figure out some on your own. Another thing is just financial. Finances is a lot what locks people down because they get so far in debt that they have to work 12 jobs and then they have to say no to the Lord so much. They can't be on mission. They can't be intentional about their finances and their giving. And if you want to do that, we have what's called Financial Peace University. It's a Dave Ramsey course, and Patrick Brondos and Bob Ernos both are trained and skilled in that. If you want to take financial peace, we can hook you up with that. And then ultimately, Life on Life. You should be on this list. I mean, this should happen before December. Everybody in this room, figure out. I don't care if you're 99 years old. Because I just challenged a son who's getting ready to take his stepdad through this. And he was so scared to ask his stepdad. I just walked up to his stepdad and I said, hey, if he asked you, would you go through? He said, I would love to do that. Most of my ministry has been spent being a pastor to people older than me. We made these rules. God didn't. So I want to take some people in this room through Life on Life that are way older than me so I can glean from you as we go do this, because it's an equipping of the saints. So now I need to explain a little bit. Life on Life is a 21-week process of discipleship that we've done. We started, it was by a pastor, a friend of mine at Wilson Community Church, and he started this, he put all this material together. I've been doing discipleship organically for so many years and never really gave something that I could hand to somebody and say, hey, Alex, take this and run with it. I just sort of said, hey, you got some notes, here's what I do, here's how I disciple people, and the return rate wasn't as great. Well, by lesson 5 on Life, if you're not taking someone else through it, the person discipling you stops. Paul and Mark. The relationship stops. Yeah, we're going to pick it up later. We don't have an issue here, but I'm discipling people who are ready to disciple people and ready to be obedient to the Great Commission. And we've got a huge amount of people going through it. You need to figure out a way to do that. That or financial peace or premarital. If you want to just figure out how to be more intentional about that. I want you to listen to this. Here's people in this room that are capable of taking you through Life on Life. Myself, Brittany Stillwell, Anno Camazin, Colton Miller, Patrick Wildermuth, Dennis Chapman, Dustin Serrano, Nick Taylor, you'll have to call him in Hawaii, Ben Phillips, Karen Welburn, Autumn Garcia, Beth Brondo, Sheila Wiles, Kayla Camazin, Elise Serrano, Peyton and Maddie Roberts. They're not a package deal. Peyton Roberts, Maddie Roberts, Jada Wildermuth, Cindy Phillips, Liz Rodriguez, Mary Patron, Leanne Burns, Kim Welburn, Liddy Drew, and Carrie Olson. That's the people who are in the next stage, ready to take people on. Some of them already have people. If you know some of them, say, hey, take me through it. So our next step is simple, really simple. I want to do Life on Life discipleship. Write that down. Write that down as the next step and just look at it this week. Here's a few ways that you can sign up and just say, hey, I want to be a part of this. One, just on your tear-off portion, just write your next step, put your name, give us a way to get in contact with us. Or you can go to our website and just find it there. There's a Life on Life discipleship. Fill out the information. I want to be a part of a church who is so urgently making disciples who make disciples that nobody guesses about what we're about. I don't want to be a church that's trying to go deep. I don't want to be a church that's trying to be seeker sensitive, or a church that's really trying to do great worship, which it was so intense this morning. I want to be a church that's making disciples, and guess what? Everything else will be a byproduct. I would love, we have scheduled the third week of every Sunday for baptisms. I was here a few years ago We baptized people 12 weeks in a row because there was a season where our church was hungry to bring people to Christ. So if the church stalls out, if the church closes its doors, if the church has unavoidable or unreconciled issues, that's on us. We're a family. We are everybody say family. So be a good member of the family. Do whatever it takes till you are worm dirt. Do whatever it takes to reach whoever you can for the glory of God. Would you stand with me and pray? Father, we come to you. Thank you that you made us disciples who make disciples who make disciples who make disciples. And Lord, that because of that, we stand here and get to say, I choose you, Jesus. Because we've heard the gospel. We heard that a man came and he died for my sin and he rose again. He overcame death. And that man was the God-man, Jesus Christ. And he lived a life that I could not live. And he died a death I should have died. So, Lord, everybody in this room, I hope that they've handled that, because right there is the first broken relationship they need to fix is with you. And the only way that they can do that is just by surrendering and in faith, repenting of their sin and trusting you as their Savior. They don't have to clean up their life. They don't have to get everything right to come to you. They just need to come to you. Lord, and the rest of us, we represent your name. May Celebration Church and the people who call this body home, may we not take your name in vain by leaving relationships broken or by not figuring out how to disciple somebody in our life and get under the leadership of a Paul and come alongside of a friend like Barnabas and finding somebody like Timothy that we can just pour everything and let them see our messes and let them see our struggles, but pour all we know about you, Jesus, into them. God, I thank you. I love this church. I love the people here. And I thank you that the leadership and the volunteers and the staff and all the workers with the kids and First Impressions and the band, we're all part of something bigger instead of our own little niche. So may we be healthy. May we be strong. May we multiply by discipling. We just thank you in Jesus' name.